Shalom. Hello again. Well, tonight we're going to have the 7th of our Dead Sea Scrolls series of programs, and this is the last one of this series, which is to say we've caught up now with the release of the new texts from last fall and interviewed several of the translators and scientists who discovered them, and we're going to wrap it up, and this will be one series. Then as new things are discovered, of course, we'll continue chronicling the Dead Sea Scrolls, getting the news out as fast as possible. We've waited 40 years or so on scholars who didn't really want to release them at all, and we're going to do just the opposite. We're going to get them out as fast as we can. We'll be on location on tonight's program at the University of Chicago. We have been out in the wilderness there at Qumran, where all the caves are, Cave 4, where the latest translations were found, and the latest scrolls, and other caves there, where the Essenes lived. Although you hear our scholars say that they are not traditional Essenes, but wilderness people or New Covenant people of the wilderness. Very Messianic people. And that's what we're going to talk with Dr. Michael Wise about tonight. Scrolls that are quite Messianic in nature. We went to the Oriental Museum at the University of Chicago. His office is there. It's a museum of the Middle East. The Orient begins there. So you have Egyptian artifacts and the gates of Babylon and Israeli things, a real Dead Sea Scroll jar with a scroll in it, and great statuary from the different biblical cultures, you might say, the ones the Old Testament covers. These are older than the Greek and Roman cultures. Very fascinating to know about. And we looked through the museum carefully, but mainly we sat down with Dr. Wise and opened these scrolls, which are of the major interest to our viewers, the ones about the Messiah. And indeed, these people were conscious of Messianic prophecy, who might have fulfilled it, what it was like, and so on. So let's go now to the University of Chicago, Dr. Michael Wise, and our new subject, the Messiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Professor Wise, there's ongoing discoveries in the scrolls, and some of the most recent, I've understood, have Messianic ideas involved.
That's right, Zola. There are a number of texts among the scrolls that have very interesting Messianic ideas or statements. This is one of the most interesting of the new scrolls. It seems to be related to the book of Daniel. The author, we don't know who the author was or who the seer was, the one giving the interpretation of the vision, because that's over here in the portion of the scroll that's missing. But whoever it is falls down before a king. Mm-hmm. And goes on to ask, O king, why are you so angry, and why are you gnashing your teeth? Mm-hmm. That which is to come, the great God, that would be God, of course, of heaven, has revealed to you, and everything's going to come to pass just as he says it will. And we have a portion here which is unfortunately more broken, and we've learned that that's a rule in scroll scholarship and in general in the study of ancient texts.
Or the Murphy's Law of ancient times.
That's the portion you really want to have isn't there, and everything else that tantalizes you is there. But the portion that's really of great
this is real average, isn't it? Daniel talking to the king.
Yeah,
there are several scenes like that in the book of Daniel, interpreting his dreams.
That's right. This is right along with that genre of text.
Sure. Okay.
But the point that's different and that doesn't occur in the book of Daniel is very interesting to us as scholars and to any person who's interested, I think, in the Bible. We have here at the bottom of this first column, and going over then to the top of the second column, reference to a figure who is to come.
Read that for me in the original here, and let me hear what it sounds like, if you don't mind.
This is a text that's written in Aramaic, okay? And it says, Uvishme yithkane, and by his name he will be nicknamed or called. Mm-hmm. And apparently it means a figure who will be called by the name of God or known by the name of God, okay, in a special way. Okay, then we go up to the top. Bre di el yithamar, uvar alyon yithkone. The Son of God, he will be called, and the Son of the Most High, they will call him Yikrone.
Well, this is right out of the book of Luke.
It's very, very similar to the portion
Son
of Luke
of God, he will be
in the
called.
first chapter. That's right, almost word for word identical. It is not impossible, Zola, that the author of the book of Luke knew this text, this Aramaic text, and thought that it referred to Jesus. Now, this text may not have been intended to be referring to any particular figure, but the interpretation of it is what's interesting. The Christians, early Christians, may have interpreted it in a way, and Someone else might have interpreted it in a different way, just like we do with texts of the Bible today, and have all through history.
Having seen this writing, he, upon beholding Jesus, thought, this is the man that answers that text. Huh?
It is so close to the book of Luke, and the wording is so nearly identical that it's striking, and it's hard for us to, it's not difficult, let's put it that way, to believe that the author of Luke knew this Aramaic original. And of course, scholars have always thought that there might have been Aramaic and Hebrew sources that the authors of the Greek Gospels knew and used. There may even have been Gospels in one or other of the Semitic languages.
It's fascinating. And you have others. Now, this has been buried for the 2,000 years, give or take.
That's right.
And we've just gotten this out.
We've just gotten it.
Oh,
and,
this is wonderful.
So we now have the opportunity to study what is essentially an addition to the book of Daniel, talking about a Messiah.
In general, the people that wrote these texts were Bible people.
Oh, yes.
They lived in Israel, of course, the period of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were familiar with biblical books.
Very familiar. That was their reading. That was what they thought and meditated upon, even those who couldn't read. And it appears that only about 15 to 20% of the population was literate in the ancient world. Even those who couldn't read, of course, could hear the scriptures being read and expounded, and this was their world. The people who wrote these scrolls knew the Bible better than almost anyone on earth today. There are a few, those who've memorized the Bible are the only ones who are comparable in their knowledge of the Bible to those who wrote these scrolls. Because these were the scholars of their day, the most brilliant men, and mostly men, we don't have too much evidence for women, of Israel spent their lives in this way.
So when they speak of a figure being Messianic, they've read Messianic prophecy. They don't say this lightly.
That's absolutely right. They know Messianic prophecy very well.
They copied a whole book of Isaiah, for example.
That's right.
Now, what other Messianic scrolls have you found?
Now, this is the fragment that has gotten some attention. It starts off by quoting the book of Isaiah, the 11th chapter, the first verse. A shoot shall come forth from the root of Jesse. The root of Jesse, of course, Jesse, the father of David. So here was a reference to a son of David, which was, of course, often a messianic way of referring to future figures. They had to be a son of David in order to qualify as the Messiah. And it goes on to say...
The Bible even specifies that Messiah, when he comes, whoever he may be, must be out of the family of David.
That's right. And the people knew that.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
So anyone they would describe as a Messiah had to qualify in that way. The fourth line here is the one that's really interesting. It says, Vehemitu nasi ha'edah, and they will put to death the prince of the congregation. Now we know from other Dead Sea Scrolls that the words nasi ha'edah, prince of the congregation, refer to a Messianic son of David figure. They are speaking of a Messianic figure here who is evidently being put to death. Now that's very, very important for us, and especially as the next line throws a little more light on it. Uvim cholalot yetzaveh kohen, and with piercings a priest shall give order. And we don't know what followed after. Again, it's broken.
Piercings as in, they shall look upon me whom they've pierced.
That's right. They shall look upon him whom they have pierced. And it's the same Hebrew word. So it seems to be that this text is bringing together quotations from various portions of the book of Isaiah and applying them to a figure.
This author trusted Isaiah to the degree that he's reiterating this prophecy, applying it to a Messianic figure of the time.
And it's very interesting, too, that he appears to be referring to Isaiah 53, because we don't have evidence in general that that very important chapter of the Hebrew Bible was understood messianically among the Jews at the time of Jesus, apart from this text. Of course, the early Christians from the very beginning understood that text to refer to Jesus. So they had a messianic understanding of that portion of Isaiah. But scholars have always said, well, did the Jews, other than those who became the early Christians, have this understanding? And our evidence has always said that the majority of the Jews, the only evidence we really had, suggested that the Jews thought the chapter didn't refer to an individual, but rather to the nation of Israel as the suffering servant.
That's usually the answer if one is trying to prove that passage to be Christological to a Jew. He says, my rabbi said that's the nation of Israel, that's God's servant. But evidently what you're saying is the people that wrote these scrolls thought this applied to a man, not a nation.
That's right. That's right. And it should be emphasized that this is one way of interpreting the scroll. Scholars are going to be writing about this scroll and many others for many years. There's very little that's absolutely straightforward as we study these materials.
Am I completely crazy to say that this is one of the great finds of modern times, that people are going to talk about our century as the time the Dead Sea Scrolls came out?
I don't believe that's an exaggeration at all.
I'm so excited. I don't know how to tell you, and I was from the first day that I heard of, especially these Messianic texts.
Well, we have another Messianic text if you'd like to look at that one.
Yes, Vakasha.
This is a text that starts off at the beginning here, speaking apparently, it says, Hashamayim v'ha'aretz yishma'u limshicho. The heavens and the earth will listen to, i.e. obey, his Messiah.
Meshicho.
Meshicho, HaMashiach, right?
Yeah.
That is the Messiah of God, Meshicho, his Messiah. And the text goes on to describe some of the marvelous things that this, and it's not clear whether it's God himself who's doing it or the Messiah who's doing it, and I don't believe it's really important because the two are so closely fused in the text, which goes on to quote portions again of Isaiah. We have here, down in this line, a reference to Yechaye et hametim. He shall raise the dead. Literally, make to live the dead.
So this is peculiar only of Jesus if the Gospels believe.
That's right. We don't have evidence of such belief about a Messiah at the time of the scrolls, apart from the Christian gospel, that there would be a Messiah who would raise the dead.
The land of Israel, Israel my love, is like no other land in the world. We're bound for the promised land. We're going back to Israel. And the people who have joined us on past tours say it's an experience they will treasure for the rest of their days.
I think every Christian needs to come here and just sense the same things that I guess all of them that have felt going before us, because we've heard it said that your whole life will be changed if you come to the Holy Land and you can relate more to where Jesus was in the temple and all the great and mighty things that he did.
This is my second tour with Zola. The first one was in June of 1984. And it was a beautiful tour. It was so lovely. And I love Israel so much, I had to come back and see it again and live it again.
Come with us to Israel and walk where Jesus walked. Let us break bread together in Jerusalem. Okay, for the sake of argument, the Gospels themselves relate that when Jesus presented himself in Galilee or Jerusalem or whatever, the crowd was divided. He, by no means did the whole nation follow him.
That's right.
In fact, the majority really did not. Yet, then I assume it means if some had expectations of this kind, then others had expectations of some other kind. He didn't fill the bill for them.
It seems that the general belief at this time was a belief in a political Messiah, a national figure who would arise and restore the fortunes of Israel. And that, of course, was the belief of even of the disciples of Jesus about his function.
To deliver Israel from Roman occupation.
That's right. As we recall in the book of Acts, shortly after the resurrection, in Jerusalem, he's asked, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? They expected that Jesus would fulfill this role that was expected of the Messiah, that he would lead the nation to the former glories, that the nations round about would come to worship the God of Israel or else would be conquered. And so there was a great deal of what Jesus did that was not expected. And I think that was one reason why it was difficult for people to believe he was the Messiah.
And this scene on the Mount of Olives, well, we talked about that before we filmed today. Here are thousands of people, I suppose, waving palm branches and shouting, Baruch
Hashem, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai.
Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who cometh in the name of the Lord.
That's right.
Now, in your view, some are shouting, blessed is this Messiah, in answer to Zechariah 9:9, our King comes. And others are shouting, blessed is this general who can heal the sick and feed people out of 2 baskets or a basket of fish and loaves. This fellow who's going to deliver us from Rome.
Yeah, many of these crowds, as you recall, disappeared when things got a little bit rough. You know, they weren't really believers in Jesus yet. They were willing to believe if he did what they
If
expected.
he would perform the way they wanted him to perform, they would follow him. But otherwise, it was dependent on his accomplishing some political purpose.
The idea of rising against Rome in this time was very popular. And if a figure would rise up and say, I will lead you to victory against the Romans, follow me, he could get a good following. We know of other figures who arose around the time of Jesus or before, who led people out into the wilderness. They would redo the wilderness wanderings as they did in the time of Moses.
Whose image makers may have said, he raises the dead.
That's right.
He walks on water.
Well, one of them even predicted that he would march around the walls of Jerusalem and the walls would fall.
Oh, yes.
The Romans would be defeated. But that man wasn't a true Messiah because the Romans went out and cut his head off.
I'm reminded of Bar Kokhba in 135 AD, who led a revolt against Rome that led to 500,000 Israelites killed in it.
That's right.
And a total dispersion. He was killed defending a town the size of, what? Betharet was its name, I remember.
Yes, a small little settlement.
So people should appreciate Messiahs came down the road pell-mell a lot of the time.
And Jesus even himself spoke of such things. You'll recall in the Gospel of Mark, the so-called little apocalypse, when he's talking about many will come in my name and they will say, go out to them. What do they mean when they say go out to them, to go out to this person? They would go out into the wilderness. There was an association between the Messianic movement, and I mean it that in that way. There was a movement, a group of different, a welter of different groups who were interested in this rise of a Messianic leader who would lead them against Rome. It would always involve going out into the wilderness. That's where they expected the Messiah to appear. That's why some believed that John the Baptist was the Messiah. He was out there baptizing.
Michael, what other interesting scrolls have come up now recently?
This text goes through...
And its shape is so strange because there's parts torn away.
That's right. This part is torn away. Yeah. This part is torn away. Right here you can see a
binding.
A stitching.
Yeah.
What they would do is they would stitch together pieces of leather. Each piece of leather would hold 4 or 5 columns. Okay? When they ran out of space for that, they'd have to start a new piece of leather and they'd stitch them together. So that means there were 4 or 5 columns before this and 4 or 5 after that. And we can start to piece together the way the whole scroll might have looked when we see this sort of hint. Anyway, this text is called the New Jerusalem text, and it goes through so an angel leads the seer, we don't know if it was Ezekiel or somebody like him, around the city of Jerusalem that exists in the heavens. It's going to someday be on the earth.
The New Jerusalem.
The New Jerusalem
is coming down in
coming
the book
down.
of Revelation.
That's right.
Oh my, yeah.
And this author builds on the book of Ezekiel. The last 8 chapters or 9 chapters
A
talk
description
about,
of the temple of the...
that's right, the temple of the future and the city of the future, and gives all the measurements down to the last detail. Yeah. Far more measurements than are given in the Bible, and much more detail than is given in the Bible, in either the New or Old Testament.
Where did the scroll writer get his information?
That's a good question.
My word.
That's a good question. But I think that one reason that they went through all these things in such meticulous detail was that it was a sign of how sure that future was. If you could actually know all these facts down to the last little measurement, the last cubit, how certain you must be in your belief that God would bring this all to pass.
Oh, yes.
And how reassuring it would be to read this and to know that somehow these things were sure and fast.
In Daniel 12:4, in the end of times, knowledge will increase. And I guess he meant this kind of knowledge, spiritual knowledge, and we sure are getting it. And you're helping a lot, Michael.
Well, thank you.
I really want to thank you for appearing on our program.
Well, it's been fascinating. I never get tired of talking about these texts.
Many of the scrolls were prophetic in nature, that is, the commentary type of writing, and featured stories about future wars, the sons of light versus the sons of darkness, and so on, rather like the book of Revelation when you read them. And of course talk about the future temple. It was understood that the king would come and reign in a temple, Messiah would come to his people, a world ruler, and he would have his own temple. And it refers not to the 3rd but the 4th temple in history. We've seen 2 already, Solomon's and Zerubbabel's, also called Herod's temple. But we'll have a tribulation temple. Some people say that's virtually being built, although we have examined the temple artifacts in Jerusalem, and we've had them on our programs, and it isn't really being built, but it's sure being thought about. And then will be the fourth temple, the one that's pictured in the scrolls, the millennial temple. It's described in the Bible in Ezekiel 40 to 48. 9 chapters of description, and those who read the prophets are quite familiar with that temple. One controversy that arises is, do they need a temple anyway, since the temple was a house of sacrifice? 2 Chronicles 7:12, God says, I accept this place unto myself as a house of sacrifice. Well, yes, there will be a temple in the millennium, that's clear. Ezekiel's writing is quite clear. And yes, there will be sacrifices in it. And every time I say this on the air, I get tons of letters, but please just look in there. From Ezekiel 43 to 45, you will see plenty of sacrifices given. And why sacrifices? No, not to forgive sin. Sin is a thing of the past among the believers in the kingdom anyway. But the sacrifices seem to be of a memorial nature, a way to remember what it used to take to absolve sin, let's say, or how temple worship once was. There will be a certain number of sacrifices, and they are given in the Scripture. So before you write to me, how about reading the original? I didn't make it up. I read it there. Okay, but the writer who talked about a future temple in Israel was an inspired writer indeed. You think God gave him his utterances, because after all, this is an amazing thing to say from his position in the first century there out in the wilderness near the Dead Sea. Well, what do the Dead Sea Scrolls amount to? To try to recap all of our programs, what do we have here so far in the new translations that have been released? Of course, we pointed out in the first program there was a new release, practically a pirate edition. The scholars that had the things were just suppressing them. It was useless. I mean, I don't know how to say how shocking it was that they would hold those scrolls all this time with such beautiful messianic salvation messages practically to be seen by the whole world, waiting there hidden in people's trunks and desks. Finally, they're out. Okay, what do we have? Well, we have an extra biblical record of the times, at least. In other words, it's not just the Scriptures that cover first century Israel, the appearance of Messiah, the signs of the times, the writing, the thinking, but we have a record other than biblical. You know, if you compared it with Greek and Roman literature, it's much more valuable than any record we have there. Or to say it another way, the only thing comparable is to dig in ancient Rome in some cellar and find not a few pieces of paper, but a 1,000-page stack of records of the time written clearly so we can read them in the native language and find out what their culture was about. That's the first level. Secondly, we have a wonderful Bible corroborating set of transcripts. In other words, we can see that our translations of the Bible are perfect, thanks to the Jewish people who kept these scrolls for these millennia, centuries leading into millennia, recopied them perfectly every time. Thanks to those Jewish people, we can have our churches, some of whom you've seen on this program even defame the Jews, but by gosh, thanks to the Jewish people, we've got an accurate Bible to read. And then we have a record out there of biblical people. That's a third thing. We have found out the Essenes were not some kind of a retiring, quiet monastic group that hid out there for their own ascetic reasons. Not at all. They were active, messianic, praying, worshiping, hoping, dreaming people of the Bible. They were not so much interested in politics. Rome and Israel's arguments, occupation, taxation, etc., did not occupy them, but they were messianic. They looked for that ruler to come out of Israel. In one of our programs, we showed that Josephus said it was belief that a messianic ruler, a world-renowned ruler, would come out of Israel that kept these people going. And we have out there the roots of Christianity. This is the beginnings of what is now the church, a Jamesian kind of Christianity, very Jewish, very legal. The Messianic congregations, you might say, would certainly trace their lineage right there to Qumran. But more importantly, all churches would. This predates Paul's journeys. This is different from the Christianity we read about in the empire, in the epistles to the Romans and the Greeks. Really, this is the heart and root of Christianity and of biblical Judaism. Not rabbinic, that doesn't go back to anywhere, but biblical Judaism, the way it was, is reflected in those texts. And there's much more to come. I personally await that, that great moment, that Yeshua text, where somebody names the Messiah who came, who died for his people, who rose from the dead. That's the one I'm waiting for. Well, Daniel 12:4 says, in the end times, people will run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. I think this is a direct fulfillment of that scripture. Knowledge is increasing like crazy. I want you to understand all of it. Get the video set. I'm going to make you an offer that is a very logical and reasonable offer, and that is to study these things and be ready. This is the most important series we'll make because this is the roots of the thing. These first 7 programs, including the national special, we've gathered on videotape, and we will provide the whole series for you. It's $69 for the 7 programs. I think that's pretty reasonable. I think that's store rate or less. So that's delivered to your mailbox. For $9, our report that we've been offering right along, introducing the whole subject, the transcript of the national special word for word so you can read what the scholars have said, and an explanation of the whole subject so you can follow. So one or the other, you can call with your credit card to our phone number, 800-WONDERS. That's easy. Or you can write to our post office box. $69 for the video series, $9 for the Dead Sea Scrolls report. We've been calling it book or booklet and report, all the same thing. And I hope you can help us with some gifts. More scrolls are going to be uncovered. We're going to have to go back to Qumran. We're going to have expenses. We're going to have to talk to these scholars some more and see what we're getting. I'll be here at my post reporting it to you. I hope you can help us and read and pray about these things. And as you do, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.